Here's the problem Ukraine faces in 2024. Its 2023 summer offensive, which started in June, more or less petered out by October or so. Since then, the front line hasn't moved much, and most small movements we did see were small Russian gains. So a question arises: will Ukraine try for another big offensive this year? Furthermore, does it need to try it? Should it try going for it? And why might it want to wait? Why might it not be able to wait? This video will cover all those questions, plus what's needed for its success, the chances that Ukraine will get all that's needed for its 2024 offensive, and the option for a long game war, in case the offensive is not in the cards. The front line in Ukraine is at a standstill. Large offensives aren't working. A throwback to the stalemate of World War I 100 years ago, and a great transition to today's sponsor of the video. Supremacy 1914 knows a bit about World War I. There I started a match playing as Poland. Let's see if my eastward offensive will work, or whether will it too come to a standstill. Supremacy 1914 is a free-to-play online PvP strategy game, where you get to choose a real country and lead it during World War I. Depending on the game mode, it's possible to play against up to 499 other players in real time. That means the pace is very slow and methodical. The games can take weeks to complete. Frankly, with my work schedule, that's right up my alley. That's why it's also great I can play on the desktop from work and then continue playing the same match at home from my phone. Binkov viewers that sign up from the Binkov link will get an exclusive gift. Click on the link in the video description to get 15,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Back to our video now. The question of whether Ukraine needs to go on another offensive during 2024 depends on several variables. How difficult would it be? How risky would it be? What are the pros and cons of it, depending on likely outcomes? And then to compare all those with likely outcomes of similar offensives tried in 2025 instead, or even in a 2026 offensive, or in theory even not doing anything and somehow trying to outlast Russia, hoping Russian gains would just crumble on their own. Summertime is best for offensives. Spring and fall are too muddy in Ukraine. They've slowed Russian progress in 2022 and Ukrainian progress in 2023. But summer of 2022 was when Russia kept securing some gains, and late summer was when Ukraine managed to do its successful offensives. As we saw, the 2023 summer offensive failed for Ukraine, but it was still the best Ukraine could do at said moment, due to Russian fortified defense lines. So this coming summer is likely the best moment to attempt it, if a 2024 offensive is needed in the first place. But is everything needed for a successful offensive in place? Number of troops-wise, Ukraine might have a smaller advantage over Russia this summer than it did in 2023, unless it manages to mobilize and train those reported and requested 500,000 more troops in time, which is not a sure thing, as the Ukrainian parliament has been locked over that decision. Zelensky had at one point said that 3 million new jobs would need to be created to support 500,000 more troops. An alternative to that is that the West increases its financial aid to Ukraine to pay ample salaries to Ukraine's soldiers. But so far, the opposite seems to be happening, with both Europe and the US dragging their feet on matching the 2022 and 2023 investments in Ukraine, let alone increasing them. Of note is that the US government counts its aid differently. It includes stuff like paying for replacement weapons that go to the US military. Using that metric, the US says it funded $113 billion for Ukraine so far. And the future much talked about 61 billion aid package also includes some 20 to 30 billion for restocking the US military arsenal. Part of that can of course always be again rerouted to Ukraine. A distribution period of said aid is not known. Biden had at one point planned for 24 billion to be distributed to Ukraine from December 2023 to September 2024. So the entire 61 billion sum may be distributed by early 2025. Does less money mean Ukraine will defend more? On November 28th, Zelensky announced Ukraine was to significantly enhance fortifications along its front lines and borders after consultations with the generals. In particular, those would be areas opposing Donetsk, areas around Kharkiv, but also areas opposing the front lines up north, which have been largely dormant ever since April 2022. Zelensky specifically mentioned Sumy, but also 4 regions facing Belarus. Finally, Zelensky mentioned even the Kherson Oblast in the south, where Ukrainian lines are already protected by the mighty Dnieper River. As seen in January, fortifications have already started being built, and the work put in very much resembles what Russia had done in the south. Interestingly, nothing has been said of Ukrainian fortifications towards the Sea of Azov. Now, fortifications in themselves don't have to mean Ukraine will be just defending. What it can also mean is that Ukraine plans to man all those borders more lightly. A fortified border can certainly be held by a smaller number of troops. And then in theory, all those available troops could be siphoned elsewhere, maybe for another offensive to cut off the Russians at the Sea of Azov. Equipment-wise, Ukraine seems to be doing okay-ish. Not all, perhaps not even most of the vehicles the West has sent to Ukraine has been lost yet, and further equipment is trickling in, though at a much slower pace. What's likely not included in the list of military aid is stuff that Ukraine buys directly, using its own funds, which can of course be helped by the financial aid from the West. Not only is Ukraine increasing the number of equipment produced domestically, but it's contracting defense firms in Europe, bypassing governments to secure additional shipments. In December 2023, Zelensky said Ukraine had produced 3 times as much equipment and weapons in 2023 as it did in 2022. Ukraine has started producing NATO-caliber standard artillery rounds, the 155mm ones. It's planning to reach 80,000 drones produced per month by this summer. It's making 6 Bogdana self-propelled 155mm howitzers per month now. That's 72 per year, compared to some 300 high-caliber self-propelled howitzers that the West has delivered in the last 18 months or so. Artillery is one of 2 key areas for Ukraine in its fight with Russia, other being control of the skies. Artillery pieces are getting destroyed regularly or need replacement parts, so a constant influx of new artillery pieces is crucial. But for an offensive to have a greater chance of success than the 2023 one, Ukraine would need to overmatch Russia even more. The Royal United Services Institute said that during the summer of 2023, Ukraine had indeed overmatched Russia for a short while, by 40%. But it was not enough on its own. And now Ukraine is firing fewer shells, while Russia has doubled its artillery usage. And the long-term trends are not looking good. Russia seems to be increasing its artillery production. It's purchasing ammo from other countries, while Ukraine is struggling to maintain its numbers, even with the West's aid included. Even when the US Congress releases further aid, production in the US may not be enough. During half of 2022 and the entire 2023, US, the entire Europe and Turkey provided close to 3 million 155mm shells. That's great for Ukraine, but it included drawing down from stocks, including transfers from third-party countries like South Korea. There's less room and willingness to shrink the US and European stocks any further. What's being done instead is increased production of new shells for Ukraine, but that takes time. The US may be at just 1/4 of Russian shell production by 2025. That's if Russia does not increase its production any further. The EU was doing similar numbers to the US recently, but not all those rounds go to Ukraine. So it appears likely that by summer 2024, Ukraine will have even less artillery fire support than it did during 2023 offensive. The silver lining is that at least the control of the skies over the front might be somewhat better. Ukraine will start getting F-16s this year, but jet fighters alone won't help much. There might be maybe 24 in action by the year's end, as Ukraine needs time to retrain enough pilots. It's the SAM air defenses that will do most of the work. Ukraine is slowly regaining the numbers of operational long-reach SAM batteries that it once had at the start of the war, as Russia seems to be slow at finding and destroying SAMs, so the influx of newer systems from the West is quicker. That is greatly helped by the Franken-SAM project, mating of US missiles to Ukrainian sensors and vehicles. But even with all that, who's to say that all those systems will be able to shut down skies near the front line? Ukraine needs that for the offensive to have a greater chance of success. While it's now sporadically catching Russian planes near the front line off guard, it's doing that in ambushes, rolling in its air defenses near the front line in silence, downing a few planes and then running away before Russia gets a chance to find the culprit. If a big offensive is attempted, such ambushes will not be enough. Ukraine will need to have a permanent presence of air defenses near the front line to keep the airspace over the front line shut down. for weeks and months at a time, to keep most of the planes and helicopters away to be sure, but crucially to prevent Russian recon drones from surveilling the front lines. Right now Ukraine is pacing okayish in that regard and will be better than it was in summer of 2023, but it still may not be where it wants to be, control of the skies wise, compared to where it will likely be in 2025. It's one of those rare areas which is easier to track for in the long run, and Russian air power doesn't seem to be set outpacing Ukrainian defenses in the meantime, though that may not include Russian smaller recon drones, which are quickly rising in numbers. Ukraine not trying an offensive in 2024 might seem like an issue, but a much bigger problem than that would be if Ukraine tried another big offensive before the situation was ripe for it and failed to do it. If that happens in 2024, after the 2023 failure, then indeed the international support for Ukraine might crack. One might say it's already been cracking, but US money for Ukraine is more a matter of when and not if, at least until the end of this year. If Trump manages to enter the White House in 2025, then all bets are off the table. It's not just about external sentiment. Ukraine's own morale might plummet if another offensive fails, if the lives of many Ukrainians are lost for nothing to show for. That would not only impact morale of existing troops, but morale of the whole population, including prospective future conscripts. If enough people try dodging mobilization, Ukraine might indeed find itself in a position, come 2025 or a bit later, where previous unsuccessful offensives lost too much manpower, and further offensives simply become untenable. So what if Ukraine doesn't attempt a big offensive in 2024? Well, then it won't take any large piece of territory. It may try to take advantage of Russian carelessness if it rises and nibble away at the front lines here or there. But frankly, so far we've been seeing Russia doing such nibbles more than Ukraine. Would no territory regained in the whole of 2024 be a problem for Ukraine? Not necessarily. Politically, it could be a problem, to be sure, but risks involved may force everyone, from Ukraine to the West, to understand that a pause to regroup is needed. Ukraine can try to really prepare itself for a big 2025 offensive, enjoying labors of ever-increasing Western artillery and other equipment production, the labors of ever-increasing domestic weapons production, and a long training and experience period of further mobilized armies. Or it can simply try to outlast Russia, not go for risky big-scale offensives at all anymore, but weather out any Russian attacks, making Russians bleed many more casualties in those attacks. Trouble with that approach is, what if Russia does not keep attacking? Russia is still holding 18% of Ukraine. Even if not entire areas of southeastern regions are under Russian control, Russia might decide it's satisfied with that. It's very unlikely Russia can ever take Kherson region north of Dnieper anyway, so it might settle for chunks of other regions as well. While Russia would not achieve its initial goal of changing Ukraine's leadership, and while it would not achieve its still currently stated goal of demilitarizing Ukraine, Russia would be able to say it got away with fair chunks of Ukraine's territory. For Ukraine, that would be regarded as a loss for sure, even if most of Ukraine would remain. If Russia stops attacking, Ukraine will simply have to start attacking at some point. Maybe not in 2024, but in 2025 or later for sure. But Russia knows all that. Just like Ukraine, Russia can't afford to throw away soldiers and equipment in fruitless attacks. Sure, it may seem like it's doing that locally, for example around Avdiivka, but that's still a small local battle. A wide offensive would lose many more troops. Even if Russia does keep pressing in 2024 and sees it's losing too many troops, it will stop before the point where those attacks hurt its future potential, just like Ukraine did in October of 2023. So it's not like Ukraine will automatically get a free pass through Russian lines after a failed Russian offensive. So yes, Ukraine almost absolutely needs to go on some sort of offensive sooner or later in the future. But no, 2024 doesn't necessarily has to be the year of those offensives. However, 2024 absolutely positively needs to see much prep work laid down for later offensives. Ukraine can still mobilize troops, sure, but it needs financial aid from the West to pay for those troops, and it needs much more hardware from the West. We're talking an order of magnitude more stuff than it got by the summer of 2023. Right now, however, the West is nowhere near that point. Said increased aid is crucial, as Russia's own military might is a moving, advancing goalpost. Once again, we'll mention Kiel Institute research on aid to Ukraine compared to World War II military aid. Those are annual averages, so hoping the current aid will compound over time is not gonna cut it. Vastly more aid per year is needed if Russia is to be comfortably outspent and outgunned. Outspent to the point where Russia sees no chance in the long run. The 2024 offensive is not crucial for Ukraine, but its morale is not infinite. Its population pool is now roughly 5 times smaller than Russia's. We talked about manpower in our recent video. So if the West wants to play the really long game, a decade-long war, current levels of financial and military aid might just drag the war to the point where Ukraine physically runs out of troops, before Russia does. If Ukraine is to win, West's aid needs to be so massive in a fairly short time span of just a few years that it overmatches Russia's capabilities. Right now, Ukraine still has the manpower to actually use all that hypothetical military aid from the West. But in 5 or 10 years' time, that may no longer be the case, no matter how many tanks or missiles the West decides to send then. 2024 may not be crucial, but 2025 and 26 may very well be. Before we go, a few more words on Supremacy 1914. Look at all these units I can build in-game. While the game starts with basic stuff, later on I do get to play with tanks, huge railway guns, airplanes, and hopefully, once I manage to break out my Poland to the sea, with battleships. I have to be careful who to declare war on though. Diplomacy can be a large part of this game, as can province management and trading with other players. Maybe I'll seek out a partner and form a coalition. It's always dicey as a new game starts. There are many strategies to choose from in Supremacy 1914, but one thing is for sure, they all end up in epic battles, and there's always the one goal, to take over the world. Remember, if you click on the link in the description, you will get 15,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free. Offer is available for 30 days, so don't lose time. Choose your country and dominate the world. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.